Well, what's up, RIM family and friends? Welcome to the RIM.online. My name is Drew Worsham, and we are so glad that you are joining us today, wherever you find yourself. Our team has been working so hard each week to make sure that this online experience is possible, especially in a season where the Delta variant, it continues to go up and people are feeling unsafe. We want to try the best we can to make sure that you feel comfortable and that you still get to hear from God through an online experience. So we're glad you're joining us, whether you're out of town, traveling, or just playing it safe. I wanted to take a second and just tell you that we love you. And I know that every pastor is probably supposed to say that. I think that's in the job description somewhere. But I really am proud of you guys. Everything that God has been doing over the course of the last really year in our church's existence has been really sweet and really encouraging. Like, as I know I'm the pastor, but as just a person in the city, this is the type of church that I would want to be a part of. And as we've been learning how to pray, like to legitimately pray, not just have little prayer services or gatherings, but to really get on our knees and seek God, what we're learning is that oftentimes we are the answer to those prayers. And we've been asking God to move in big ways on the college campus. As this past week, there are 35,000 college students at UTSA, many of them coming back. Classes started this past week. There are 90 plus countries represented in the student body, many of them in closed countries. And God has put them in our backyard, and we believe He's given us the responsibility to love them well. And this whole week, church, you have shown up and you've been on campus loving college students and reminding them that there is a church for them. And not to recruit for a gathering, because honestly, we just don't care that much about that. But we don't want to be a church just with college students. We want to be a church for college students. And we've just been on campus all week loving students and watching God do some really cool stuff, even watching some college students say yes to Jesus this past week. The second thing is we have a heart for the refugees. And this past week, we've been praying for the people of Afghanistan, those that are there, praying for the house churches, praying for the women and the children, even praying for the Taliban, that God would do something miraculous in their heart. And right south of UTSA campus, about two exits down, is where the refugees, the largest refugee population in Texas, is placed right there. And we go, God, you've put them once again in our backyard. We want to love them well. And so we've had a few of our female staff and a lot of our ladies in our house churches that just went out on Monday and just went to these apartment complexes and just played with children. And as the women came out, they were invited to drink tea and have cookies, and they just loved them. Even we got to hear a story about one woman who literally just landed in San Antonio. It was one of the few that got to escape Afghanistan this past week. And church, here's the thing. We believe with all of our heart, we should give. We want to be radically generous. But a paycheck or writing a check isn't enough. That God, I'm so grateful that He didn't just send us a book, but that God was willing to leave heaven, put on flesh, and He came to us. And He's asking us to do the same, to be incarnational ministry. The flesh would step into the broken areas and to love people well. And you are doing that. And you have done it, and you will continue to do it, whether it's on the college campus or with refugees. Man, we are so proud and can't wait to see what God is going to do in the coming days. So I love you, church. I really do mean it. Well, if you have a Bible, I would love for you to grab it and meet me in 1 Timothy chapter 1. And we are in the second week of a sermon series that we're just calling Thrive, which I get feels a little youth campy. But here's the point, is in a season where most of us, I would say, feel as though we're barely surviving, especially when it comes to our spiritual walk with Jesus, we begin to ask questions of what does it actually look like for us to thrive and to be all that God has called us to be and to experience the fullness of God. And so that's what we're going to be looking at today. Last week, Lashad taught, and it was unbelievable. If you haven't heard it yet, go back, listen to the podcast. You will be deeply, deeply blessed. Now, I'm just going to piggyback off what he shared last week, where he talked about how that as believers, we experience conflict because we should expect that because of our countercultural convictions that come from a connection with Jesus. And today, I want to zero in. I want to double click on this, a connection with Jesus and what it actually looks like on a day-to-day basis. Now, 1 Timothy is a letter written by the Apostle Paul, and he's writing it to his young protege, his young disciple, Timothy, who he sent into this church plant in Ephesus. And he's dealing with all kinds of issues, including, false teaching and illegitimate leadership and divisiveness. And he's going to be able to walk him through how to handle these situations. Now, this week, we got to come home from the hospital. Our 2.5-month-old son, Lyndon, has spent most of his life in a hospital. And this week, we got to come home. And last night, I was just thinking and praying over him and just began to have these visions and images and just imagining and dreaming of what it'll be like one day as he gets older and maybe plays sports. And I had this thought of imagine if he's playing Little League and I got to coach his team. And I decide to write him a letter because I'm going to be absent at his next baseball game. And so I write him this letter telling him how to wrestle and how to face this specific opponent in this specific game. Now, if that were true, I'm not going to write and cover all the rules of baseball. And honestly, if you were to read it, it may look a little scattered. It may be like, hey, when you get in this situation, you're going to want to try to bunt, or don't lead off too much because this pitcher's really quick, or maybe have the outfield scoot in, or watch for this pitcher's curveball. And I may give all of these different scenarios, but ultimately to encourage my son, I'm going to go, you need to focus, you need to zero in on one rule. Don't forget this. Son, always keep your eye on the ball. Always keep your eye on the ball. What am I saying? That you can do all these other things, but make sure that you focus on the main thing. And that's what Paul is going to communicate in this letter. As he deals with all of these different situations, he's going to come back and he's going to remind Timothy, when you deal with that, keep the main thing the main thing. Keep Jesus at the center of it all. Keep your eye on the ball. Why? Watch this. Because your connection with Jesus, or Jesus being in the center of it all, leads to a practical, visible change in the lives of those who believe. It leads to a life that is thriving. The gospel, we're going to see in this letter, in contrast to false teaching, will always lead to godliness, will always lead to the life that you long for and that you desire. That Christian behavior, Christian patterns come, don't miss this, from a connection with Christ and Him being in the center of it all. So we're going to hit each chapter really, really fast. And I'm going to kind of summarize so you know, so you can see this letter holistically. And so in chapter 1, Paul's right out of the gate going to kind of show Timothy that there's these false teachers that are teaching all this false doctrine. They're focused on myths and endless genealogies, he says, and empty speculations. And you're kind of like, well, okay, what does that have to do with me? What's that like? Here's kind of what, if we translate that into 2021, it's like he's saying, hey, stay away from Christian clickbait. Stay away from Christian clickbait. Do you know what I'm talking about? Like, do you know clickbait? It's those captions on emails or websites that draw you in and make you want to click. So there might be examples like, you'll never believe this, ... And you're like, oh, I'm curious. What is it that I will never believe? Or maybe it's how to achieve results of this one weird trick. And you're like, well, there's a silver bullet out there. I want it. Or this is maybe one of my favorites. It's this outrageous truth about green gummy bears will destroy your world. That's a real clickbait. And I clicked on it and found out that green gummy bears, the flavor is strawberry. Oof, who knew? But that's what clickbait is. And Paul is saying is that all of this endless genealogies, all these myths, you're pulling the focus away from the main thing. You're pulling it away from the main thing. And so Paul's going to say, hey, don't get distracted. Don't get distracted. And he tells us to keep our eye on the ball. And we see that here in verse 17. Here's what it says. Talking about Christ Jesus, he ends the first chapter with, or kind of summarizes the end chapter with this, verse 17. Now to the King eternal, immortal, invisible, the only God, be honor and glory forever and ever. Amen. What's Paul saying? Timothy, as you wrestle with all of these things, keep your focus, keep your eye on the ball. And here's what that is. Jesus is at the center of it all. Jesus is what matters. All of these other issues are just distractions. Jesus needs to be in the center of it all. And so he moves on into chapter 2. We're going to see that he kickstarts this chapter by telling Timothy to focus. Verse 5 and 6, he says, for there is one God, one mediator between God and humanity, the man Christ Jesus, who gave himself as a ransom for all, a testimony at the proper time. Keep Jesus in the center of it all. That Jesus is what matters. Keep your eye on that ball. Now, what's interesting is chapter 2 is about to get pretty crazy. And there's a lot of here that can be divisive and honestly can be distracting. So we'll just read it here, and then we're going to jump ahead. In verse 8, Paul says, therefore, I want the men in every place to pray, lifting up holy hands and without anger or argument. Also, the women are to dress themselves in modest clothing and with decency and good sense, not with elaborate hairstyles, gold, pearls, or expensive apparel, but with good works, as is proper for women who profess to worship God. A woman is to learn quietly with full submission. I do not allow a woman to teach or have authority over a man. Instead, she is to remain quiet. Now, church, we don't have time to fully go into all of this. And another sermon for another day. Here's what I do know. Immediately, our hearts got distracted. Immediately, even though Paul started with the focus of being on Jesus, this mediator, this one who made a ransom, who brought us from death to life, immediately some words in here just, man, they hit a nerve. And I get that, and that is totally fair. But I want to just pause really quick, and I want to give you my interpretation of this, of what I've kind of studied over the course of this past week, that'll hopefully help spotlight some things. First off, Paul is speaking to the church gathering, and he's saying there's a lot of distractions that are taking away from the main thing. There's a lot of things that are preventing you from keeping your eye on the ball, from keeping Jesus at the center. And first off, men, you guys are arguing like you're about these false doctrines, and you're just trying to one-up each other. It's like you're so competitive and combative, and you're filled with anger. He goes, you're distracting. You are pulling people's focus away from Jesus being in the center, and you need to learn to calm down, keep quiet, and learn to pray. And then he turns his attention and says, ladies, you're making the gathering out to be a fashion show. And you want everyone to notice that your clothes and your wealth, and you're strutting around and trying to pull the attention off of Jesus and onto yourself. He's like, don't do that. Walk in modesty. He's not telling them not to wear jewelry. He's just saying, be proper. And then he goes and he adds some pieces that I think, culturally context, but just at face value, can be very confusing, Paul. where he says that women, you should learn in full submission, and I don't allow women to teach or have authority over men, and she should remain quiet. Now, I'm just going to be very, very quick. In Ephesus, there's a couple things that are going on. First off, there's a language barrier here. The most of this language that was communicated, Jesus spoke Aramaic. A lot of these people spoke Greek. And so what would happen, and a lot of times the men were bilingual. And so as they're preaching in Aramaic or even sometimes Hebrew that the men could understand, but the women didn't, so they were constantly nudging them and being like, hey, explain what's going on, what's going on. And Paul's going, hey, when you get home, talk it out. But there's so much distraction. They'll answer questions when they go home, so be quiet. The second thing is Artemis is the sex god. And all of the prophetess and the priestess, they're women. And so they're leading this cult, and some of them are starting to come to know Jesus, and they're assumed authority in the church because they were a leader in this cult, and they're actually leading to more false doctrine moving forward. And Paul is going, no, do not assume that authority. Wait patiently. Come underneath Timothy's leadership. Let him train you with proper theology before you step into those moments. And so there's where we land theologically, and I hope that helps kind of like alleviate some of that. But once again, here's the point. Even me side noting that. The focus, regardless of where we land with this theology, Jesus has to be in the center. And at full submission, man, women, whole church, we fully submit to Jesus and keeping him in the center. Paul will go on in chapter 3, and he begins to show like how leadership should happen inside of the church. And so there should be this people who are both father and good husbands that they step into godly, they're walking in godly character. They're men that have proven that Jesus is in the very center of everything they are. These deacons are very similar too, that Jesus is in the center of their life, and they walk in that, and you see the fruit of that in their lives. And once again, he brings it back after talking about leadership. He's like, hey, it's not about performance. We're not looking for men or women who can perform like they have it all together, who can do all the Christian things. No, these are men and women who have Jesus at the very center. And so he even reminds us in verse 16 of chapter 3, and most certainly the mystery of godliness is great. So the mystery of how we live this godliness and thrive in it is great. Let's bring the tension, eye on the ball. He, Jesus, was manifested in the flesh, vindicated in the spirit, seen by angels, preached among the nations, believed on in the world, and taken up in glory. He goes on in chapter 4, and he begins to talk about some different components of issues in leadership. And he talks about how these bad leaders are speaking doctrines against, hey, don't eat meat and don't get married, and all these other rules that Paul thinks are ridiculous. In chapter 5, there's these kind of troublemaking widows and shady older alcoholic men that he's supposed to kind of combat. And in chapter 6, he sees the conduct of these slaves and greedy, corrupt leaders. And he ends this entire book once again by telling them to keep their focus on Jesus. In verse 15, he, Jesus, is the blessed and only sovereign, the King of kings and the Lord of lords, who alone is immortal and who lives in an unapproachable light, and in whom no one has seen or can see. To him be honor and eternal power. Amen. Keep your focus. Keep your eye on the ball. What is that, Paul? Keep Jesus at the center of it all. Now, I want to try to help illustrate this and make that practical, because if not, today we can walk away and it's just, that's a cool little phrase, Jesus at the center of it all. It was a great song, Drew. Love that. Glad that's the theme. But how does it actually work? Well, hopefully this will help today. And I'm going to slide back and hopefully this will work. But many of you knew this about my past. I for 15 years traveled full-time as a professional magician. Now, I'm aware that what I'm about to show you looks very cheesy. It looks like a cheesy magic trick. Okay? I'm not trying to pull one over you. But here's what you have. This cool little stoplight. And inside, it matches. So there are 3 balls here. I'm going to try to take these out for you. Red, yellow, and green. Okay? Now, here's what I want you to do. Today, I want you, where you're tuning in, I want you to imagine that each one of these represents something in your life, some priority that maybe you have. It could be your family, it could be a job, it could be your future, whatever. But today I want you to take this red one and we're going to set it aside. And in your mind, I want you to let it represent God and everything that He is or maybe isn't in your life. And so here's the thing. Life comes at us fast. If past year has taught us anything, it comes at us fast. And we have to try to figure out, like, okay, how do we thrive? Like, how do we actually make this work? And so what we'll do is maybe we'll go to places like the church, or we'll read the Bible, or maybe talk to friends or mentors that we trust. And you don't have to listen long before you realize there's a pretty simple pattern to follow, right? It's green. Green's the one that goes on the bottom. Between these two, yellow. Yellow's the one in the middle. And many of us, even with no church background, have been taught along the way that red is the one that you keep on top. God should be number one of your priority list. Now here's the deal. Some of us, I think if we work really, really hard, we do an okay job at this. Maybe we find ourselves getting up in the morning and reading our Bibles and journaling. Maybe we rock the Christian t-shirts and we go to church every time the doors are open. And maybe we're even leading a small group or part of a house church. And maybe we're doing an okay job. And if you were to break it down, you go, you're nailing it. You're doing a great job. You're keeping God number one. But I think over time that gets exhausting. It's based upon your performance and not necessarily based upon just proximity with Jesus. And I think some of us can pull this off, but for the vast majority of us, it doesn't take long before we get tired, frustrated, and we quit. And over time, we just start to kind of lose that kind of shimmer. And we go, okay, like, we'll just do it blindly. Like, I don't need the help. Like, I've kind of got it in autopilot, right? So it's the simple pattern. We all know it. Like, I don't even need to look, right? I can look away. It's green. Green's the one that goes on the bottom. Between these two, yellow. Yellow's the one that goes on in the middle. And we've been taught, no matter what, keep God number one. Here's where this gets scary. Some of us, we still get up in the morning. We're still reading the Bible, still at church every time the doors are open, still raise our hands, sing the songs. And on the outside, it looks exactly the same. But if you were to be honest, if you were to just open up and look inside of your life, I think the vast majority, if we dug deep, would find that God is nowhere near the top. And in fact, He's a lot closer to the bottom. Now, it goes a step further. I think if you keep playing this game, you're still trying to perform, you're still trying to figure it out, that eventually you burn out. It doesn't take long. You get tired of pretending, you get tired of being the hypocrite. And so what happens is you begin to isolate yourself, you separate, you compartmentalize. And here's how that works. You go, hey, here's my story, my life, and then here's God. And they're different. So maybe the easier way to look at it is we have this box, this closet in our life, and we say, God, here's where you go a majority of the time, and when it works for me, when it's convenient, when it works into my schedule, then I'll snap my fingers and you can come out and play. God, here's the deal. You can hang out on Sundays. If Thursday night or Friday, or maybe Wednesday night, whenever we have house church, like you can come out, you can hang out. I'll give you 10, 15, 20 minutes on a good day in the mornings. But the rest of the week, you hang out here. How I spend my Friday or my Saturday, you hang out here. God, it's cool. I'll give you the money. God, I'll give you my hobbies. I'll give you the sports. I'll point to the sky if I score a touchdown. It's all yours. I'll give you glory. But God, what I do with that boyfriend or that girlfriend of mine, how I live out my marriage and how I treat my spouse, you have no business there. I get to decide that one. And we take God and we set him in this compartment of our life, and we make him out to be this cosmic genie that whenever it works for us, we'll snap our fingers and he'll jump out and he'll grant us wishes. And if something goes wrong, you better believe I'm going to blame you, God. But this is where you hang out a majority of the time. In church, my prayer for us is that we would get sick and tired of this compartmentalized, exhausting life. And then as we begin to look as we maybe dive in and we dig deeper in the days ahead, church, my prayer is that as you look for God in the box, that he wouldn't be there. That he wouldn't be there. And here's the deal. Can I be very honest with you, church? As you look into your life, and I hope that God's not at the bottom of your list. But if I'm really transparent, I don't care if he's at the top of your list either. Instead, my prayer is that God would be in the very center of everything that you are and every place that you go. This is where God longs to dwell. Jesus desires to be in the very center of everything that you are and every place that you go. He has zero desire to be a priority in your life, just something that you check off the list, some do or don't know. The truth is this, church. The moment that you see God for everything that he is, when you see him in all of his beauty, when you see him to be the treasure that he promises to be, then Christianity is not about do's and don'ts and keeping God number one or trying harder or muster up enough willpower to make it another day. No. When you see Jesus for everything that he is, then you look at what so often we've made rules and regulation and religion, and we go, no, I don't want to live like that. That's surviving at best. I want to thrive. I want to be connected to Jesus. I want him to be in the very center of everything that I am. I want him to be in the center of my relationships. I want him to be in the very center of being a college student and walking on campus. I want him to be in the very center when I go to work. I want him to be in the very center of how I date. Jesus desires to be in the very center of everything that you are. And church, I'll submit it to you this way. Anything less than this is not Christianity. It's just religion. And it doesn't help you thrive. It doesn't help you be all that God has called you to be. So church, what would it look like for Christ to be in the very center of everything that you are in every moment this next coming week? I want to give you 120 seconds for you to process these two questions. God, what are you saying to me? And then how can I actually live this truth out? I love you, church. Take this time, be obedient, and would you walk in it this week?